What is a cutlass? This isn't a cutlass. This is a cutlass. But what defines a cutlass? The Oxford English Dictionary defines a cutlass as a short sword with a flat, wide, slightly curved blade adapted more for cutting than for thrusting. Now especially the sword with which sailors are armed. It gives the earliest form of the word as cutlass from 1594. So this is a word that's been around for a long time. It has been suggested that the word was originally for a form of axe carried by sailors. Then, when fashion changed and they took to using swords, the name was transferred to the new weapon. However, it is more likely that it derives from the French couteau, meaning knife. The Board of Ordnance, who were in charge of buying cutlasses for the Navy, did not actually like the word cutlass. They called them swords for sea service, which Commander W.E. May and P.G.W. Annis used as the title for their work on the subject. These are the books that I've used as the main source for this video. In these books, they trace the evolution of the cutlass back to its earliest records owned by the National Maritime Museum. In these, a first-rate ship from 1677 was allowed 50 swords of some unknown type, possibly backswords, and 70 cheaper hangers. Hangers are short swords that hung from the belt and were used by both officers and ratings. The term first appears in the 15th century. Over the next 100 years, hangers and backswords would become seen as the sidearm, which was suitable for naval ratings. It's the first step in the evolution of the cutlass, and we can see some of the features that would become common in cutlasses from the records found by May and Annis. First of all, hangers, like cutlasses, are short. You could say they cut less. Secondly, all of these types of sword have a single-edged blade. Third, all of these types of sword have a cut and thrust blade. And finally we get to the feature which the admiral was probably most interested in. They're all made on a budget. Over time, the swords worn at sea would evolve and split into two different blades. Some hangers would get longer and heavier. They took on some characteristics of the backsword and became what we call the cutlass. Others got even shorter, until they evolved into the dirk carried by volunteers and then midshipmen. As the hanger evolved into the cutlass, one of the properties it took from the backsword was the large handguard. First came the shell guards on Dutch cutlasses, and then the cheaper double disc guards used by the Royal Navy. We start to get more information about this design of cutlass from a batch ordered by the Board of Ordnance in 1804. They had a cast iron grip and a guard made from a single piece of steel that had been cut into a series of linked discs. This double disc guard is characteristic of this period of cutlass. It was designed to be stamped out cheaply and in large numbers in order to satisfy the bean counters in the amity, but it does have some other important features. This guard gives good protection of the hand, but more importantly it's symmetrical, so it can be used by either hand. Being able to fight with either hand is something that we would find in all of the official drills of the Victorian era. Swordsmen of the British Empire collected this example from at the front about the naval brigade which fought during the Indian Mutiny. The seaboy was a good swordsman. He wounded the sailor in one arm. "He had you there, Jack," said his comrade, quick as a flash. The sailor shifted his cutlass to his left hand, and this was something the seaboy had not been prepared for. Before he could guard, the sailor had cut him down, remarking as he did so, in answer to his comrade, "Yes, by God, he had me, but I have him now." So, let's create a list of the characteristics that most British cutlasses shared from the buccaneering age onwards. They're cheap. They have a short cut and thrust blade. The blade is straight or slightly curved. They have a large handguard that can be used by either hand. Cutlasses of the other maritime powers were similar. They all had short cut and thrust blades. Normally you had good hand protection, although they did often sacrifice the ability to be used by either hand for an asymmetrical guard which made it easier to be worn as a sidearm. So, why in pop culture do cutlasses look like this? These are the top results if you do an image search for cutlass sword. They are all recognisably the same design, but other than being cheap, they don't share many features with the cutlasses that sailors used. Real cutlasses are cut and thrust blades. Pop culture cutlasses are specialist cutting weapons. Real cutlasses are either straight or have a slight curve. Pop culture cutlasses are extremely curved. So, there are some real cutlasses which have a clipped tip, but most taper into the point. the pop culture cutlass flares dramatically towards the point. Real cutlasses tend to have a lot of hand protection. The pop culture cutlass has only a moderate hand protection. This is probably because it's easier to cast a knuckle bow than a bowl guard, so they don't cost too much money, and at least this penny pinching is historically accurate. Pop culture cutlasses do not look much like historical cutlasses, or much like other real swords for that matter, but there is another pop culture weapon that they are very similar to. These are the top results if you do an image search for scimitar. They don't much look like real wet swords from India or the Ottoman Empire, but they do look a lot like the pop culture idea of a cutlass. They're both specialist cutting weapons. They both have a heavily curved blade, and they both have the cartoonishly huge yeoman, the way that it flares out just before the false edge near the tip. So, within pop culture, the idea of what the cutlass seems to be has got mixed up with the idea of Middle Eastern swords. Where did this come from? I don't know for sure, but I do have some ideas.